A tide is the daily change in the level of the ocean water. Now, there's a few things that we need to look at in this definition. Daily. That means that the tides happen every day without fail. It doesn't matter if it's a beautiful day. It doesn't matter if it's storming. It doesn't matter if it's windy or if it's not. The tides are going to happen every day. The other thing that we need to look at is that it's a change in the level of the ocean water. So we've been talking about waves and currents, but waves and currents happen in different parts of the ocean. But when we talk about the tides, we are talking about the ocean as a whole, all the water in the ocean. Imagine if you were in a bathtub and you turn it on and the whole level of the bathtub rises. That would be like a high tide. When you let the water out, the whole level of the bathtub lowers. That would be like low tide. So that's what we're talking about here, is we're talking about the whole level of the ocean. The reason that tides are a daily occurrence is because they are not caused by forces on the earth. The tides are actually caused by the gravitational pull of the sun and moon. And that's why we can count on them every day, because it's not about what's happening on the earth, like I said earlier. It's not about the weather. It's about actually what's happening in space with the sun and the moon, both of them pulling on the ocean water. Tides are caused by the gravity of the moon and the sun, but the moon is going to have a stronger pull because it's closer to us. So the moon's pull is the strongest on whatever part of the earth is directly facing the moon. So in this picture below, we see the moon on the right, and we see the right side of the earth is facing the moon, and so that is why that part is in high tide. So what the moon is actually doing is it is pulling on the ocean water, and it actually comes off of the earth slightly, and that's why it creates a bulge. Well, at the same time, the moon is actually pulling on the solid part of the planet too. And so the left-hand side of the earth actually kind of moves away from the ocean waters, or moves to the right a little bit, and that's why the left side is also in high tide too. So whatever part of the earth is in high tide, the direct opposite side of the earth is also in high tide. And then we can see that on the top and the bottom, the North and the South Pole in this picture, that they are both in low tide because that's where the waters are stretched thin. When talking about tides, it's important to note the tidal range of an area. Tidal range is the difference between levels of ocean water at high tide and low tide. It's basically how much space is in between the two types of tides. And so we can think of this really just like a math problem. The word difference tells us that we're going to subtract. So let's look at the problem below. What is the tidal range of an area if the high tide is 26 feet and the low tide is 17 feet? Pause the slide for a moment to figure this out. If you answered 9 feet, you are correct. 26 minus 17 is 9. Now let's think for a minute. Why would it be important to know the tidal range of an area? Well, let's say you go to the beach with your family and you set out your towels on the shore, and then you go play in the water. You get back and you see that all your towels and all your stuff is soaking wet. You didn't take into account the tidal range. So you put your towels on the sand at low tide, but didn't realize that you didn't realize how far the high tide came up. So that's why it's important to know the tidal range. At certain times in the month, there are two special types of tides, and this is all related to the phases of the moon. So the first one is called a spring tide. A spring tide is a tide of increased range, and it occurs twice a month, at the new moon and the full moon phase. Basically, what this means is your high tides are going to be higher than normal, and your low tides are going to be lower than normal. Here's a picture of the alignment of the Earth, Moon, and Sun in a spring tide. On your notes, draw a picture of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun in this alignment. One easy way to remember this is that spring, in a spring tide, they're in a straight line. So you've got the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun all in a straight line. And if you kind of think of the Sun and the Moon playing tug of war, it's kind of like they're on the same side, and they're both pulling on the waters of the Earth. And so that's why you get extreme tidal ranges. You have higher high tides and lower low tides. Now this next one, a neap tide, is kind of the opposite. A neap tide is when you have a tide of minimum range. This also occurs twice a month at the first quarter and the third quarter moon phases. Here's a neap tide. So in this alignment, we see the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun make a right angle, whereas before in our spring tide, they were all in a straight line, and so it's almost like the Sun and the Moon were ganging up on the Earth. But now it's like they're pulling in opposite directions, so it creates a weaker tidal range. So take a minute and draw this alignment in your notes. Now this is just a fun fact, but it's pretty cool in relation to the tides. This is a place in Nova Scotia, and it's called the Bay of Fundy, and it is recorded as having the greatest tidal range in the world. It's about 20-something feet. So the picture on the left is a picture of a harbor at high tide. You can see the water coming up to the foreground. You see there's a boat attached to the dock. The picture on the right is at low tide. And what's happened is the water has receded and gone back, and if you look way in the background of the picture, you can see the water there, and you can see the boat is now on dry ground. Pretty crazy. To review what we've just talked about, you're going to watch a video and quiz yourself by going to a link on my website. So go to my website, the address is listed in front of you, click on the links page, you're going to go to hydrology, and it's a link on the left-hand side called tides. This will take you to a Study Jams page, and I want you to watch the video first, and then there is a spot where you can quiz yourself, and it will tell you how you did. Good luck.